Are you a thoughtful leader? Maybe you are. Maybe you think you are. Let's find out. I'm Mindy Gibbins-Klein. I'm author of The Thoughtful Leader and host of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. Thoughtful leadership is all about thought leadership that goes above and beyond. Thought leadership that is truly new and original, exciting, disruptive, maybe even groundbreaking. Because let's face it, we need to raise the bar. My guests and I are absolutely obsessed with finding truly original thought leadership, and I'm going to bring you so many exciting ideas and opportunities, things for you to think about, and chances for you to push your thinking that you'll be very glad you tuned in. So thanks so much for checking out Thoughtful Leadership and the Thoughtful Leader podcast. I look forward to connecting with you very, very soon. Guess where I am? Well, you'll never guess unless you've been to this exact place. Actually, where I really am is not what my background says. Yeah, you're assuming maybe that I'm at a beautiful place with some water behind me and a gorgeous sunset. Or maybe you know that lots of people use backgrounds nowadays. And of course, if you're just listening to me, you're thinking, what the heck is she talking about? So now your brain is trying to imagine what's happening. I will help you out there. The background behind me is a photo that I took in Barbados. And yes, it was a beautiful sunset. And there I was at a gorgeous, gorgeous bar that looked out with a 180-degree panoramic view and watched that sunset. It was just so, so gorgeous. And I think I captured quite a nice image of it. Of course, if you're still just listening to the audio and you have FOMO, you should, because you're missing out on all the video content from all of my podcast episodes. So I am going to assume that you just didn't know there was a video, and I'm going to post the link for you so that you can start watching the channel if you like. And if, of course, you don't want to or you can't view video, that's fine. That's why we do both. Back to the view and back to where I really am. So I'm really in St. Albans, north of London. It's where I've been for 15 years. And most people know that I love London. I would say I'm a Londoner. I wasn't born here, but I really love London and the surrounding areas. However, we do get interesting weather. We do get nice weather. We don't get this kind of weather, kind of Caribbean weather, except for a few weeks a year, maybe. Anyway, lots of people in the UK enjoy their holidays and look forward to them and plan them and need them. But that's not actually what I want to talk about. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't sitting here, if you're watching the video, and wondering about that background, the view, and where the photo was taken. So now you know. All right. I want to talk about assumptions because I've already mentioned it once. I'm going to assume that people listening to the audio get FOMO because they're missing the video. But is that really true? Many people prefer to just listen to audio and not get distracted by video. And they listen to audio while doing other things. If you're cooking, for example, it is really hard to keep looking away and watching a video and, something could burn on the stove. And that's just one example. So I'm not going to assume anything about you. You can tell me, of course, and we're going to take a look at how many people are watching the videos compared to listening to the audio version of this podcast, because I don't want to assume. And ideally, I hope you don't make too many assumptions. They say, you may have heard this, I'm sure you've heard this, don't assume. If you think about the word, you make an as, that's the first three letters, out of you and me. Not necessarily. We need to make certain assumptions. We can't second guess every single thing in our lives. And this goes back to how long is a piece of thinking, right? How long is a piece of thinking? And I have covered this before. It's as long as it needs to be. But if you're careful and you don't make assumptions about things that you really don't know about, then you should be okay. And you can put some thought into it. So you don't need to second guess everything. I'm going to share a story with you that I've never shared before anywhere. And I'd be really interested in your views on this. It happened to me, so I'm not telling any stories about anybody else or embarrassing anybody else. This happened, I think, about 12 years ago. And one of my sons was at boarding school. So that's always a tricky thing for a parent. I don't know if you've been through it, but they go off, or maybe your kids have been off on holiday or off with your partner and they've not been with you. And, you just hope they're okay. There's something about boarding school where they go off every week or even for a few weeks or a term, and you have to assume they're okay. You can't always hear from them every day. Well, I did used to hear from this kid maybe 3-4 times a week. Sometimes if he was busy, maybe once a week. But one day I got a text on my phone and it said, "Sorry, Mom, in hospital, can't call today." What do you do with that? So my husband wasn't even there. So I immediately went into panic mode. So I called the school and I said to them, "Listen, I've had this message. Is he in hospital?" And they said, "Oh, not that we know of. Let's see where he is. And I'll call you back," because it was a big campus. And while I was waiting, I imagined all sorts of things in my mind. I assumed the worst, absolutely the worst. And the other thing that happened was it just clouded my brain. I never even thought to look at the phone and figure out what number that was, because it didn't have my son's name next to it. But I just saw that message and panicked. Then when I looked, and I was still waiting for the call back from the school, I looked and I thought, well, that's not my son's number. What number is that? And I was just about to press redial when the phone call came into my phone. It was my son saying, what's going on? I'm not in hospital. I'm fine. And I just didn't have anything to say because my imagination had run away with me. After a couple of minutes, he needed to get back to class. And I did press that number and it went to voicemail. And the voice I heard was a client's voice and female. I had to keep listening to figure out what was going on and to put that together with the text that I had. In fact, she had tried to send me a quick text because we were meant to have a call. And it wasn't, "Sorry, Mom, in hospital." It was, "Sorry, Mum in hospital." Her mum was in the hospital, so we couldn't have the call. Do you hear how that sounds? I went someplace that wasn't even true. And I went there and I had built up this big, scary image and I felt it in my body and I was nervous and it was all an assumption. But actually, this is why we really should use punctuation in SMS messages. Ah, dear. Imagine if we did. Imagine if I knew it said, "Sorry, Mum in hospital," and not, "Sorry, Mum in hospital." Anyway, all of that to share how quickly we make assumptions. We see someone in a wheelchair. This happens to me a lot when I'm speaking. I see someone in a wheelchair and I make an assumption that they can't stand up or walk. But that's not necessarily true, because what happened to me one time, I was really trying to be inclusive and I was doing an exercise where normally I would say, "Stand up." And I saw that person. And so I said, "If you're able to, stand up," which I thought sounded like good wording. And I assumed they wouldn't. And they slowly got out of the wheelchair and stood up because their legs were weak, but they could still use them and they wanted to take part in this particular exercise. So that was okay because I said, "If you can." But it really, really made me think, where else do we make assumptions? Where else do you make assumptions? The thoughtful leader has many, many opportunities to take a look at themselves. Self-awareness is one of the best traits for those of us who really adopt this philosophy. Let's notice what we do in the moment. Let's notice when something like that happens and we can have a lesson or a learning. And then quickly go back to being in the moment. It is possible to reflect and just step outside yourself for a moment and think, wow, I may not use that exact wording again, or I might. So this is interesting. And the thing that you want to do with it, I think, is to, in a quiet moment, reflect on things that have happened in the past day or week where you've kind of been called to attention, shall we say. Something has made you think because you had an assumption that was proved wrong. Assumptions, as I say, can be useful because if I hadn't even thought about that, the person in the wheelchair, I might have just said to everyone, stand up. So I had gone some way towards being aware of that and doing something with that. I think I'm pretty good at not making assumptions, but all the time I become aware of an assumption I made that was proved wrong. Right now, just think about something that you thought and then realized you were wrong or your assumption was wrong. It could be something small. It could be, I don't know, someone called themselves a vegetarian and they didn't think you'd know the word pescatarian, but actually they do eat some fish. That happened to me. In fact, everything happens to me. It could be that you assumed something about somebody's cultural background, and this happens a lot. And we're trying to overcompensate for our biases. So we assume something and we act in a certain way. I'm purposely trying not to pick on any culture or any assumption because I know I have biases. We all do. The unconscious bias. We will address that more in upcoming episodes. But right now, well, actually, let me just address it a little bit more right now. The unconscious bias is all about assumptions, right? It's unconscious until we make it conscious. So we don't have that gift of being able to see exactly what assumption we're making and how we want to rectify a situation. We act, and then there's repercussions, or then something happens and we feel we want to reflect and maybe change our behavior and maybe not. So these assumptions that you have made, let's be specific now. Is there something that you're a little bit embarrassed about, like me and the text message from, well, it turned out not to be from my son? Can you learn from this? Can you think of something where you really got it wrong? And hopefully you can laugh about it now. I'm laughing about what happened. As I say, it was about 12 years ago. I hope I've got over it by now. What about you? Is there an assumption that you're making right now about me? All right, let's make it personal. Whenever I meet people for the first time, 80% of the time, they will stop me at some point and say, where are you from? They're making an assumption that I'm not British, which I am in fact British. I hold the passport. I pay my taxes. I've been in Britain for 31 years. I just still retain a bit of the accent from the US. It's not exactly an assumption. I suppose it's an observation. Now, if you were thinking that, and you then went further with that, thinking, well, she's American, therefore she must be XYZ or XYZ, in fact, then those are assumptions that you're making, maybe based on your unconscious bias. As I say, we're not going into great detail on that right now. It's not my specific area, and I will be bringing a guest on about that. I just wanted to bring up the issue and opportunity of making assumptions because it's not always bad. I'll go back to one of the things I said at the beginning. Many times you find yourself second guessing stuff that actually you don't need to second guess. So if you, like me, didn't do a lot of driving during the pandemic, How were you when you got back into the car, if you're a car driver? Were you a little bit hesitant, or did you assume that you would remember how to drive? In my case, I found myself putting lots of extra thought into every aspect of driving, which might sound like a good thing, but I was almost acting like a learner driver again. I was putting so much conscious thought on things that I really didn't need to. I've been driving for, oh gosh, I'm going to age myself now. I've been driving for more than 40 years. And I do have that muscle memory, and I do have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of miles of experience. So I assumed that because I hadn't driven for, at the time, I think it was 4 or 5 months, that I would need to be really, really careful and almost learn everything again. And I had to relax, because that was, being that in that kind of nervous state, that was not a good state to be in for driving, being comfortable, being aware of my surroundings, my peripheral vision, and just being a defensive driver, because there were other people who were nervous and who were on the road. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the best example I could come up with today, but there are probably so many others where we agonize about things that we really shouldn't be spending so much time on. And that time can be spent on the big issues, on big, important things. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be lovely if you could stop nitpicking about tiny little things that drain your energy, really, and just assume that you do know. You know how to act, you know how to cope, you know how to deal with challenging situations. And if something requires a bit more thought, you choose. So this is where you choose to make the assumption or not. And this is the counterintuitive bit. And it's also a little tricky, because you have to notice what you're doing. I'm not sure, going back to that silly text, it wasn't a silly text. It was an important defining moment. Seriously, it was a defining moment for me to take a look at how quickly I make assumptions. And I'm still talking about it. This is the first time I've shared it publicly, but I still think about it, and it still informs how I act. So perhaps I'm choosing to use an assumption I made in the past to inform how I act in the future. And that's something that I think is wonderful to do. Thoughtful leaders can reflect, but not only reflect, choose how they're going to use that reflection and the insights gained from that reflection to go forward, to make different choices in future, perhaps, and to live their best life. Let's elevate it. Let's elevate it to this beautiful setting. And again, if you're still not watching the video, don't worry. It's a beautiful sunset over water, a photo I took in Barbados. You can trust me on that, right? Assume that it's nice. There's an assumption you might like to make. And if you don't trust me or you don't want to assume, then click the link that we're going to post and watch the video and any other videos you want. So anyway, I'm going to love you and leave you now, because I'm going to assume that I've spoken for long enough. I do have a kind of barometer inside. And when I'm doing these solo episodes, I just know when it's time to finish. So as I love you and leave you, I'm just going to ask you to reflect on something, whatever you choose to, and then figure out if you want to do something with that reflection, and more importantly, with the insights that you've gained from that reflection, because that's what thoughtful leaders do. And that's really what I know you're capable of doing, and we're all capable of doing it. So enjoy the thinking and reflecting, and enjoy noticing the assumptions you make and how you're choosing to live your life. See you next time. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Thoughtful Leader, and I hope it's inspired you to be more thoughtful as a leader in your business. Please consider subscribing and leaving a review. An important question for you. Do you want to create a culture of thought leadership in your organization? My best-selling book, The Thoughtful Leader, is available now on Amazon and many other sites in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. Please visit www.mindygk.com for more great content. That's www.mindygk.com. Speak to you again soon.